how deep were you aware of the "It's Florida Man" meme? Because it's a 10 years meme, right?
Yeah, I mean I knew about it sort of generally for a long time, and I had sort of casually seen read the Twitter account that used to exist and thought it was hysterical. Um, and just like how endless it seemed to be, the number of crazy stories about people marrying trees or throwing gators through drive-through windows at a fast food restaurant, you name it. So when Danny McBride's company came to me and asked me if I wanted to do a show about it, I was overjoyed because I just generally love Florida. I mean, I live here now, so I'm committed to it. Uh,
But it's
so yeah, I
yeah, it's something that potentially you say you could be a TV show or documentary, or what is the pitch?
uh, the pitch. So I came in after it was already sold to HBO as an idea, but the idea was only a sentence. It was documentary stories from Florida with comedic recreations or reenactments. That's all it was. That's all that they had sold at that point, and I sort of took it from there and tried to build it into well, I guess what you're seeing on television now. And the funny thing to me is a lot of the stories that you see that are the funny headlines, they're sort of they're pretty mean-spirited. They're about people that are on drugs or just in unfortunate circumstances in general. And I really wanted to make a love letter to the state of Florida because I see it as this sort of mythical place with mermaids and alligators and cowboys and uh, sort of the legends that you hear about the American Old West, but in today's world. And of course, a lot of lunatics as well. So it's rife for comedy. So, but I wanted to make it a loving portrait. No matter how weird, I wanted to show the world how much I love this place that's now become sort of universally hated on or derided.
But it's interesting because
So,
your style of comedy is very human. You don't just point the finger and said you're a jerk or you're nuts. You try to empathize with your characters, since Tag, for example.
yeah, well, and I think, yeah, you're right. I think the absurd is just such a natural part of life, and it's something to be overjoyed about as opposed to hidden in the closet. And I think sort of generally we're in this world where everyone's trying to be perfect, and on social media, you're only putting the most beautiful photos of yourself, and you're on the yacht or you're in the fancy hotel, and everybody's trying to like sand the corners off of life, which sometimes the ugly and ridiculous parts of life are what make it so beautiful, and I think and what make being human so beautiful. So I've always been attracted to crazy true stories. Tag was its own crazy true stories, but uh, Florida Man is similar, and then that movie was about sort of being dogmatic about silliness in adulthood, is that embracing childishness and stupidity as dogma is what keeps you excited and positive in life rather uh, than boring and unhappy. So I think, often the pursuit of happiness, particularly in the United States, is so far down the list of priorities. Uh, and you can find it in these unusual means and through these unusual pursuits in life. And I think that's kind of what I was interested with in these characters, and is, you look at a guy who's um, s- jumped into a swamp naked and had his arm bitten off by an alligator, and by the end of the episode, he's seems like a Buddha who maybe has figured out life better than you have with your corporate job and your uh, all your aspirations to be normal. And I think that's really interesting. I like seeing those kinds of human beings that you regularly wouldn't see on television or in movies that are so strange and usually sort of swept aside as characters. And when you have a true story, it's just much easier to go to those stranger places because you don't have to worry about whether people are going to believe it or not. The truth is often stranger than fiction, as they say.
Do you have a socio-political explanation or why it's Florida?
Well, I mean, the simple truth is that Florida has these laws called the Sunshine Laws, which make all public information immediately available to the public. So it's a very progressive idea, really, is to allow the people to have access to whatever's going on in the courts or in politics, but it also includes arrest records and that sort of thing. So it's been bastardized into this means by which you can make clickbait pretty quickly because you can just on the on a website just pull up mugshots and the information of why they've been arrested. And if you're reading something where man strips naked and dives into swamp and is attacked by alligator, or man gets drunk and throws uh, a live alligator through a window, it attracts clicks. So I
Mhm.
that's kind of the most boring reason that this happens. I think more so in Florida is just that it's easier to access um, the moronic mistakes of the population. But also, I think Florida, it's this beautiful uh, place, and it attracts a lot of invasive species. We've got pythons, we've got iguanas, and we have morons. And I guess I'm one of those morons because I've moved here, so I include myself in that population.
Yeah, and,
Uh,
and also it's very American because when you read the headlines and you watch the show, you just just nod with a head that says only in America.
yeah, I wonder. Yeah, could this happen in Argentina or
No.
not? Well, you should be proud of yourselves. Yeah, I think there's a certain amount that America is based on and was founded by lunatics to some extent. You know, it's a place where mythically you can be whatever you want to be, and if you're not that already, you just lie about it until you do become that thing. So I think there is this history of tall tales and legendary people, and a lot of it's bullshit, but it's part of our foundation as a country. you know and I think there's fun to that, and there's the positive of that is that kind of the sky's the limit in this country, and you can just be yourself to the fullest extent, for better or for worse. And in Florida, it's often for the worst, I guess. But I think, the states also produce all these strange celebrities and musicians that I hadn't quite realized that Tom Petty is from Florida, and Janet Reno is the Attorney General years ago. It was from here. There's sort of
Well,
there's also this. I wish I
Backstreet
could make it.
Boys and NSYNC are from Florida.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was trying to avoid those mentions. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole other show where there's like all this positive, all these interesting people who've made huge strides in in for the sake of good, but that's less funny.
So does that have to do with now the epicenter of political America is now Mar-a-Lago, which is in Florida and not Washington?
Well, that that I don't know how to comment on it. I think that's mostly because the property is cheap here. Unfortunately, I don't think it has anything to do with anything except you can build whatever you want. But of course, that's also yeah, it attracts the state attracts a lot of people because it's inexpensive. There's no income tax, so it's a great place to just run and hide and get a suntan, whether you're the president of the United States or not. Whether that suntan is sprayed on or whether it's real. Um,
No, but it's interesting because Florida, if you go up north, you have this, well, you know, the swamps and all the stuff. And if you go south to the beaches, you have a lot of immigrants, you know, if you're Cubans from the 80s. So it's like a melting pot, but also it's one of the states that basically is Trumpist. So it's how do you mesh all those things?
well, the funny thing about Florida that I even myself didn't realize is that Floridians, let's say, are in the minority for sure. There's been a huge influx of people moving to the state. So I find myself running into more New Yorkers in Florida than New York City, you know. So I think because there's such a financial purpose to move to Florida because of the taxes and stuff like that, you're attracting a person that is financially minded to begin with. You know, if you want to make all your money in New York and then keep it, you leave. So I think there's a certain political bend to that I hadn't even realized, and um, yeah, I know, the political state of this country, I'm simply a comedy person. It's hard for me to delve deep into it, but it's an interesting time,
Mhm.
I'll say.
How did you choose the six cases of the show? Because I guess you have like hundreds and hundreds to choose from.
Well, the funny thing is, uh, it is it was surprisingly hard to find stories that were optimistic and positive just from the headlines you see because a lot of those headlines, like I say, are just clickbait based on arrest directors. So there's an element of criminality uh, at its core because that's where they're originating, and a lot of them are not that uplifting, I'll say. And I didn't ever want to punch down or make fun of these people. I wanted to treat them as gurus or at least fellow humans with something to say. Like I was interested in their stories and their voices genuinely, and I wanted to see what this varied group of people um and their perspective was like. And we tried to find things that were entirely different. You know, you have uh this gay couple who got very angry with each other, and one tried to use spaghetti sauce to burn down his boyfriend's his home. But it's ultimately sort of a love story between an African American man and a semi-racist older white man, which I just found fascinating, particularly because it's happening in Florida. But the process was tough. We had a spreadsheet of just hundreds of stories, and only so many of those really had a central character who was charismatic and was positive and a certain amount of turns instead of just like I got drunk and did this thing, which a lot of them end up being.
Did you go for the cast? in terms of being like similar to the real person, or just look for the cast you were wanted to?
A little of both. They were the cast is all we're all friends of mine mostly. So I like working with the people that I love, and so I coerce them into coming into this show. We had very little money on the show, so it was almost who was willing to just come work for peanuts and just have a good time. And thankfully, Simon Rex and Jake Johnson and Juliet Lewis and all of that cast just were lovely and were saints and just came to have fun. And yeah, there as we shaped the stories and we were editing, it really became clear who amongst my favorite actors would be great in each particular role. Having in the Mermaids episode, which had this sort of this feeling of a pop comedy about mean girls hating each other. I was like, it'd be amazing to have Anna Faris. She's like the most brilliant comedic actress, particularly in that genre, and so that was terrific. And Jake Johnson, I just try to make do everything because I think he's a brilliant actor and so funny. And Simon weirdly has a similar energy to the guy who ran into the swamp naked. That would be really funny. Yeah, it sort of fell together naturally, and ideally it works for everyone that's watching. I don't know. How'd you feel about it, Sebas?
No, I laughed my ass out. It was like, what? This is absurd. I try not to Google, the episodes just to want to be like fresh, like blank
Mhm.
slate and see what comes because I
Yeah.
didn't want any previous knowledge of any episode because I thought it would be more funnier, like, and it was.
Well, some of them it's funny. I've noticed that there's some people that are upset because they can't find the toe eating story because that didn't come from a headline. That was we were trying desperately to find other stories that didn't weren't just these Florida man headlines, like I say, because they're just coming from kind of a commercialist place and don't have that much bearing on reality as headlines. So that we actually got through a Craigslist ad, which is so funny because that's it all revolved around Craigslist. But we posted um, calls for submissions, and Phil, that guy that got himself into a night of nearly eating a man's toes, uh, just offered the story to us,
Well,
and he
when
was
you
thrilled.
when you see, that it's on Craigslist, it opens up a lot of windows because you have another show with that, the Craigslist show.
You're right. Well, I've thought about like broadening this out because I think every state could have its own series. You could
Mhm.
have it's Alabama man and it's Georgia man or it's Michigan man. Everyone has their sort of neighborhood lunatics that's fun to talk about. I think there's a certain amount of that too that like it's sort of funny to laugh at at your own state and your own neighbors because everyone behind closed doors is pretty out there in my experience. No one is as normal as they appear. So I think ideally we keep making this and we can kind of expand it. Maybe it's Argentina, man. Uh,
Why not? You can come. You're invited. So
well, like,
are you renewed for the second season?
we are, yes. So
Yeah,
now I have to
congrats.
thank you. Now I have to figure out this whole thing again, and
Yeah.
I'm hoping people will want to share their stories as much as they did last time because now we're out. But mostly everyone's been in the show has been pretty thrilled um about being on it. And I know that the couple in the spaghetti arson case were overjoyed, and Phil from the cannibalism episode was pretty thrilled about the whole thing. So um I'm hoping it'll be easy to get people in next time. We're just starting to figure it out. Of course, it's almost the holiday break here, so
Mhm.
so it's difficult to get everything organized. But I'm excited to get back into it. Hopefully, we can find more stories next season and do even more. Especially now that we figured out, when you're making the first season of any TV show, you don't really know what the show is for such a long time. You're just experimenting, and we edited probably 3 or 4 different versions of the show, trying to figure it out. How much documentary versus reenactment, and now that we know, it should be a lot easier. You know what it's like when you're editing a
Yeah.
film or anything. You're like, oh no, what is this thing that I've created?
Well, you have a script to rely on, but I guess with a show like this, that you have like two parts, which is reenactments and the interviews. I guess it's more difficult, right?
Yeah, it's difficult because it's comedy, so
Hmm.
there's a fine line between because I really wanted to be laughing with the characters to as much as possible to and instead of using reenactment in the way you'd see it in sort of a straight documentary or a true crime show or whatever, where it's trying to recreate the actual event. I was really approaching it as there is no real truth that we can lock down in this, and I think that's sort of true just generally with memory and humanity. Is that those things are sort of they're slippery. So and I thought it was more fun, and I just tend to do this naturally without thinking about it. And the same thing
Hmm.
was happening in tag, where I there's a subjective reality that's more fantastical, um, that really helps you as an audience understand how important these things are to these people. They might not have um, broken into this house like Ocean's 11, but to them, it felt like a high stakes heist in Vegas. So, we were just trying to find the line between how can we make jokes without making fun of our lead characters to the large extent.
Hmm.
And, if they're laughing at it, we felt like we could laugh at it. Um, and that's a difficult line with comedy.
Yeah.
Is how do
Well,
you
but
love your
you're an
characters?
expert. You're a veteran. You're a director of a lot of stand-up comedies shows. So yeah, how do you say comedy has evolved, or what's the current state of comedy there in the States? Based on your
It's
experience and based on all the shows, stand-up shows you directed all of these years.
Well, in film, it's pretty miserable. I'd
Hmm.
have to say that I think there have been various waves in film over the course of history. You had classic comedies being incredibly the most precise sort of filmmaking, classically to me. Going back to Chaplin, Buster Keaton, everything was so well planned and executed, and it was almost mathematical. Um, uh, and then more recently, in the early 2000s, we had this wave of really great comedies, but they were much looser and improvised. So comedy sort of became the general perception of comedy. It was that it was this sort of improvised thing that was figured out as you were shooting, and it was all malleable. And I never believed in that. I think there's value to that of finding things on a day and using your performers and their brilliance to to be additive. But the more you can be precise, because it's agonizing to make jokes work. But I think everyone thinks it's just silliness. In often think that comedy is really easy and it's everyone's just being foolish. But it's very, very difficult um, to make comedy work, especially, I must have seen Tag 130 times. And yeah, if anyone tells you a joke 10 times, it's excruciating. After don't want to hear this thing anymore. So trying to craft those things and maintain enthusiasm and make them better and make them connect with audiences and connect with character and illuminate some human truth was difficult. And I don't know, that formula has sort of died away, and film got very serious 5 or 6 years ago. Um, and there haven't been many great comedies. So I'm hoping we can kind of get back to just having fun when you go see a movie, because that's a key to me. And stand-ups exploded at the same time, so people are enjoying that. But I don't know. What's your experience about watching American comedy over the last years? I'm
Well,
interested about it.
I'm more like an absurdist in terms of, you know, genre, like Seinfeld and Larry David.
Yeah.
Um, uh, well, I really love, you know, Tag and of course Florida Man, because I think it's something that is not done, uh, uh, you know, usually in United States, especially these years. You know, comedy is like focus on a romantic comedy or like a silly comedy, but nothing in between and nothing at the ends. It's like, okay, we're focusing on this is romantic comedy, this is silly comedy, and that's it. That's the only two types of comedy that exists right now.
Yeah, well, I could go on and on about this, honestly, and probably bore everyone, including you, about it. But it's strange to me because in American film, there used to be, 40, 50 years ago, there was a there was a whole landscape of tone you could explore in movies. Something could be funny and heartfelt. And you think about Mike Nichols' movies, which were very dramatic and then hysterical and broad and silly and slapstick, but then also grounded. And I think more and more the box has gotten smaller, so you can only be this thing or you can be that thing. And I think at the studio level, it's been easier for them to brand and market things in this very narrow category, and it's made movies much worse. I don't like a pure drama or a pure action movie or a pure comedy. I see comedy as a tool to illuminate something about being human that's interesting and touch people's hearts or make you feel. And it's just a grand trick to suck you in and then get you to understand something about life or have fun with life in a different way, as opposed to just being like a joke machine. Like I don't see that much value, and I feel like a lot of American comedy has just become like, how do we pack a bunch of jokes
Yeah,
into 90 minutes, whether it means anything? Who cares?
yeah,
Who cares?
yeah, yeah.
I
I remember, for example, Nancy Meyer's comedies,
Mhm.
which are basically AWOL now. Like, where are they?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's and even and I think yeah, I've seen rom-com come back, and then there's very black comedy,
Mhm.
that's interesting. But I see movies coming from they're much more interesting movies to me being made in other places, because I don't think they have those narrow brands that
Mhm.
they're forced to adhere to. See, like, I one of my favorite movies in the last 10 years was this Danish film, Raiders of Justice,
Mm. Matt
with
Mikkelsen.
ads, and
Yeah.
it's one of the greatest comedies I've seen in ages. It's also one of the most emotionally resonant movies I've seen in ages, and it's brutal and it's action packed, and it just lives in this gray area that American films used to delve into. And I think I don't know what all happened. I don't know who to blame, and I don't even care. It's just like I would love to make a movie that had all those things. And Tag, even when people complained about it or critics hated it, they were like the tones all over the place. I'm like that. Well, that's sort of the point, you know.
Mhm.
We should be able to have feelings and laugh in one movie,
Yeah,
you
of
know.
course. But
And
since you're now in HBO, you can pitch your comedies and they maybe I don't know, even have a meeting with them about not the show, about your projects.
HBO is like it's the greatest place to
Hmm.
work for. It's the most rigorous people. They have such an understanding of filmmaking. They're so good. They can see through everything. So I would have made a mistake and I would try to cover it with something tricky in the edit. And they just immediately be like, this place is, I'm not sure about this. And I'm like, how can you immediately see everything that I'm trying to hide? It was really lovely to work with people that were that smart and had that level of acuity and understood the process. And they were very nurturing and lovely. I would highly recommend if you can work with them. And I think it's a reason why their shows have been so good over the course of time. And
Hmm.
they just care deeply about what they're making and they have a they demand a level of quality, and it's challenging and encouraging at the same time. And we had this little tiny show that was pretty scrappy and we were, you know, and silly, but it was fun to put it through that lens of how do we keep this how do we keep something pretty stupid very smart at the same time? And we tried to do that. Yeah, the unfortunate reality for so many reasons, the interest rates in the US, that economic part of it, the COVID, what's happening with streaming and theaters, it's just created a world in which you have to make things for much less money than you used to. And the gateway to making one of those things is much more difficult to get through. So uh yeah, I'm all for working more responsibly and being cheaper to a certain
Hmm.
regard, but also you don't want to compromise quality. But HBO, that it's tricky because I don't think most people realize that Max is sort of this all-encompassing
Hmm.
thing that includes anywhere from what is
Yeah.
Discovery Channel to TBS and
Hmm.
TNT. That's largely what Max is. And for me as a filmmaker, like working with HBO was it's very difficult to get a show there. So it was a huge, the exciting thing to me. I don't know if anyone else cares in the world, but it was.